Hello everyone, I'm Mary Colette Rogers and I want to welcome you to this webinar. You want to eat healthy? Then don't buy another cookbook. I'm really glad you could join me today. We're going to jump right in with a little exercise and then I'll backtrack and give you a more proper introduction. But for right now, let's get started by imagining a common meal making scenario. So I want you to imagine today is Wednesday. I want you to imagine it's 5 o'clock tomorrow, Thursday, or whatever day tomorrow is if you're listening to this later. So it's 5 o'clock or 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whenever you head to the kitchen to start dinner. You're hungry, maybe a spouse or kids are hungry, you're in a hurry to get a meal on the table, you want something a little healthier, you want something a little new and different. Well, now we've got that scenario set up. Here's the exercise. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, starting right now, to figure out something you could make on this Thursday in our imaginary scenario. I hope you have a chance to pull out that recipe stack that's been multiplying like rabbits on your kitchen counter, or a cookbook you'd like to try, or maybe some of the recipes on your computer. If so, then you can use those. If not, I'm sure you've been in this situation at least a few times and can visualize yourself walking through it. In our live classes, I actually bring magazines, cookbooks, and recipe stacks, the kind of things you probably have in your own kitchen. And it's kind of fun. You can imagine that things get pretty lively as everyone starts flipping through recipes. Yeah, that can go on for quite a while, but I always stop it after 2 minutes. So why am I only giving you 2 minutes? And I hope by the way that you're continuing to look, that really seems unreasonable. But actually, that's probably all the time that you give yourself, right? Likely as not, give yourself 30 to 45 minutes to make your whole dinner. So there isn't time for more than about 2 minutes of recipe hunting before you make dinner. And do you notice how I'm talking through the whole 2 minutes that I give you? And that's because you're very likely talking with your kids and your spouse, or chatting on the phone, or listening to the news as you hunt for something to make, right? We're trying to make this as realistic as possible. And oops, that 2 minutes is up. So now I'm wondering how it went for you. You can see that you can answer this right on your computer. Did you find a recipe? And how is the recipe that you found? Was it great, good, not so great, but it'll do? And then how was the searching experience? Fun? Okay, aggravating, stressful? So go ahead and fill that in. It's kind of fun. And I can actually then, I think there's a way that I can share the survey results. If not, I can tell you about them because it's kind of fun. You guys are performing really well, actually, because there's only one person so far who found a recipe, and the rest are no, sort of, not, and the recipes we're finding are not so great. They're okay. The experience was okay. It was stressful. And that is what happens when we go through this kind of frustrating thing every night. And so why am I putting you through it now? And that's because I want to put you in the right frame of mind to receive the information that's going to follow. And that is that if you want to eat healthy, don't buy another cookbook. So exercise to get us going, I want to back up and give you a little more information of who I am and where I'm coming from. My mission as a healthy food educator is to share the skills, the tools, and the resources to help busy people access the wonderful healing power of a healthy diet. And this is such a passion for me because I was able to experience that power, and I love to share it with others. And if you're familiar with this field, you know there's a lot of people like me. We've had similar experiences where we've experienced a health crisis, we've gone the route of healthy eating, and we found out that, by golly, it's amazing, but doing something as simple as just eating well can solve so many problems. For me, it was the story of my kids. This was 25 years ago when they were really young. And they were somewhat like the woman in this picture. This was me 25 years ago, not really, but it was somewhat like me. But my kids were having so many problems, ear infections and asthma and stomach flu and croup. And this happened even while they were on antibiotics. And so that's what clued me in that maybe something deeper is going on. So we went to see a naturopath who prescribed a wheat-free, dairy-free diet for us. And we did that, and just like so many stories today, we met with almost miraculous results. And so nowadays, this kind of story happens all the time. Back in 25 years ago, it was a pretty unique story. But even today, there is one unique aspect to my story, and that is that I was able to make the initial transition to a healthier diet. But I also discovered how to sustain it for life. And even more importantly, I discovered how to teach that ability to transition to others. I observed what I did and created a formula called the Kitchen Smart formula so that other people could do the same thing of being able to transition to healthy eating for life. And this sustainability aspect is so important because, as you know, being able to sustain healthy eating is the only way that you get to reap its health benefits. Those benefits don't come from just doing it once every other week or once a month. It comes when you do it day in and day out, month after month, year after year. And that sustainability thing is, I think, the real issue when it comes to healthy eating. Given a health crisis, most people are motivated and they get right busy and make necessary changes. But then they begin to regain their health, and it gets to be month 2 or 3, and then reality strikes. They go, oh my God, I have to just do this not just for a few weeks. I need to eat better for the rest of my life. And I'm guessing it's that realization that becomes a huge barrier for people. So that's why meal-making transformation is the focus of my programs. You've probably seen this term used in my e-newsletters because when it comes to putting a new, healthier diet into place in our lives, we need to transform the way we make meals too. We need a new, healthier way of making meals day in and day out, so healthy meal making is natural, easeful, and just something that we do, no problem. Well, as we look to create a sustainable, healthy eating lifestyle, recipes are keys. They are our friends and guides. They share the new healthier meal ideas that we need and then how to make them. Without these good recipes, we stay stuck making the same old, less than healthy dishes we now make. But recipes have problems. And we went over this in the series of e-newsletters that led up to this webinar. And I'm just going to quickly recap what we went over, just in case you missed one of those emails, or maybe you didn't even get the series of emails at all. But we started out by talking about how everybody wants recipes. People are always asking me for recipes, whether it's in a survey I send out or it's in our classes, or when they meet me and they find out that I'm a healthy eating coach. Mary, do you have any good recipes? And when I hear those requests, I sense this underlying belief that I might be the savior, the one who could give them just the right recipe, and then their healthy eating dreams would come true. So I used to give out a lot of recipes, but then I realized they were just going home and no further. They weren't showing up on the table. They were just ending up in that recipe heap on your counter. So I started exploring this a little bit further. And this is when I created that cookbook math game that I sent out in the next email. And you'll remember how that works, I think, if you saw it. I told you, take the number of cookbooks that are in your collection and multiply them by 100. Just thinking that, an average number of cookbooks, or recipes per cookbook is 100, and it makes for easy math. And then add in an estimate of just how many darn recipes are in that recipe stack that you have, or your cooking magazines, or maybe on your computer. And then at the end, add 1,000,001 recipes, because that's what you could easily pull up in 52 seconds with a quick Google search. So I'm just wondering if anybody would like to share how many recipes they came up with from doing their math. And you don't have to include the 1,000,001 recipes on the internet, but I wonder if anybody actually did that. Go ahead and share that the number of recipes with us, or even just a close estimate. And if you didn't, it's okay. Because whether you did this or whether you didn't, it spotlights the problem with cookbooks. We think it's the lack of the right recipes that's standing in the way of our making healthy dreams, our healthy eating dreams come true. So we keep searching and collecting. But you can see from this game, or just imagining the results you have if you did it, that we have plenty of recipes. But those health-giving recipes aren't showing up. And I just love this quote that came in after, I think it was the first email. One of our participants and today, and our reader says, OMG, yes, so true. I have lots of cookbooks and individual recipes, and I'm always getting more, but still don't seem to have time to make them. I'll do some simple ones that are quick, or sometimes prepare for them ahead of time, or use one for a special occasion. But otherwise, the stack just keeps growing to no avail. So the fact is we do have plenty of recipes, but we aren't doing anything with them. And I talked about the having versus doing problem in the next e-newsletter, because it's easy in our consumer culture to have things. You just buy them, whether it's cookbooks or spiralizers or microphones or whole new kitchens or a new kind of salt or cool vegetable. There's all sorts of stuff to buy. But it's only by doing with these things that you ignite change. And in the case of recipes, they do no good if they're just in a book or in a heap on your kitchen counter. They need to be translated into real meals on the table to be able to do you any good so that you can see the health benefits. Which gets us to the point of today's webinar, which is talking about that translation mechanism. So now we get back to that exercise that we started with at the outset. What it does is it helps us understand what the real problem is. And this is what I've been hinting at those in my e-newsletters, is the fundamental problem with cookbooks and recipe stacks is that they don't make decisions. They may contain amazing recipes and wonderful hints and ideas, but all they can do is simply offer a lot of great suggestions. Now, that likely seems like a pretty simplistic observation, right? Well, duh, my cookbooks and recipe stacks don't make decisions. Much as we all love it, they don't have a built-in AI chip. But it's the flip side of that simple observation that's important, and it's where I want to take you today, is to focus on the unstated half of that observation. In other words, if cookbooks don't make decisions, then you have to. Now, you may be thinking this second observation is about as simplistic as the first, but would you stay with me here and see if it doesn't contain some buried treasure? Because here's the fact. Although we're the only ones who can make recipe decisions, we don't. We look at them, we think they're neat, we'd love to have them, but only sometimes and at some point in the future. So why is it that we don't make those decisions? That might be just running through your mind right now. It shouldn't be that hard, right? In fact, though, deciding and choosing on recipes is actually trickier than you think. And that's why we don't often do that. But I wanted to show you what happens, and just to give you an actual visual picture of what happens with these cookbooks and recipes and why you don't make decisions. And so what happens is that, I've got this cookbook. You might remember the Silver Palette cookbooks. This is by the same author, Julie Rosso. And so it's filled with amazing recipes. I could make every one of them. But I remember one day actually sitting down and going, okay, let me pick out something that I'm going to make. So I get into the vegetable section, and I've got some green beans. It's summertime. Oh, here's a recipe for snappy green beans. That ought to be good. But I look and see, oh, the first ingredient is a half a cup of sugar. Well, number one, I can't have any white sugar to begin with, but a half a cup is a totally unreasonable amount at the second point. So, okay, go on from there. And then I go on, I'm looking some more, and I see a recipe for light salmon cakes, and that's great because I love light salmon cakes. But then I look down and I see, oh, the first instruction, bake the potatoes for 1 to 1.5 hours, then cool slightly, then scoop the flesh from the skin, and at that point I go, no, this is not going to work either. First, who has time, not only just for the hour and a half to bake potatoes, but then let them cool and scoop them out. And so I look across the page, and here's a recipe for braised artichokes. I do love those. But then I see the first ingredient is 24, not just artichokes, but baby artichokes, with their top bases and outer leaves trimmed. And then 36 cloves of garlic peel. My God, of course I'm not going to have time for that. So then I look on and know there's a whole big dessert section and all this kind of stuff. And finally I get to a meat section, which can be kind of good for me because I'm not that great at cooking meat, and particularly lamb because I get lamb from my farm share. And so here's a recipe for lamb. But then I see, oh, it's lamb and green peppercorn pasta. And pasta is one of the things that's not working real well with my body right now. So now you can see how many minutes I've spent going through these recipes, and I'm no closer to finding one than I was at the beginning. So what happens, though, when we get to a point where we've looked through the cookbooks, and maybe you kind of got to this point with this initial exercise, when we don't make a decision? What happens then is something that I call default eating. We punt, we fix whatever, and we fall back on the same old things that we always make. And not only are they uninspiring and boring, and they don't taste that great, but they don't reflect the change that we want to see. And where are all the vegetables, and the satisfying seasoning, and the reduction in carbs, say, and the reduction in cheese or sugar, or whatever it is, whatever those health goals are that you hold. So if you're struggling like this to find some recipes that will help lead you on the way to a healthier eating lifestyle, can I suggest that we need a better way to make recipe decisions? And that's what we'd like to talk about today, is that recipe translation mechanism. And when I talk about this, I'm going to emphasize this word creating, because the fact is that I'm going to share a lot of ideas and steps that will give you a helpful framework. But the finished process has to be yours. It has to be your own creation that works for you, because we all make decisions in different ways. So to start this, I'm going to go through 7 steps that will provide you with this framework. But to start with, I want you to set the scene, so you kind of have a scenario in your mind. Maybe like that beginning exercise, or maybe another time that you wished you had a new recipe. Why did you want something new? What were you hoping for, and what got in the way? Now we're going to go through these 7 steps, and I wanted you to see if maybe these 7 steps could help you take that scenario that came to an unsuccessful conclusion and take it to a successful conclusion. So let's go ahead and start with step 1, which is to create some comforting boundaries. You know, one of the reasons we probably don't make recipe decisions very readily is that deciding and choosing recipes can seem overwhelming. If you think about all the cookbooks you have to look through, and that gigantic stack of recipes you collected, or the thousands of recipes the internet will happily dump on you, and that overwhelm is the stuff that can just stop you in your tracks before you even get started. That's why it's important at the outset to set some comforting boundaries, because you don't want to just start thumbing through recipes with no beginning, no end, and no clear results. So think about something like, for instance, spending just X minutes of searching, or finding just X number of recipes, or maybe you want to just look through one part of your stack, or look through just one cookbook section. And you want to make sure that the boundaries that you set are realistic, that they're really doable without making you feel nervous and overwhelmed. For instance, if you want to find a certain number of recipes, which is a pretty good boundary, know that there is no need to be a superstar here. If you come up with just 1 or 2 recipes, that's great. And 3 or 4 is plenty. And because that is, it would be pretty darn good if you could make more than 1 or 2 new recipes a month. And if you made more than that, you'd be a real superhero. So really, just stick to 1 or 2 recipes. If you find that, you're doing really well. Now, step 2 is to create a space of time. Remember I asked you, how did that beginning exercise go for you? Was it stressful and was it frustrating? Well, that's why we need to create a space of time. You probably know this intuitively, even if you've never articulated it, but the creative side of the brain doesn't work under pressure. and especially not pressure when you're starving and you want food. Trying to make decisions under those circumstances is not only difficult and impossible, but it's really aggravating, which you probably notice. And you remember that I said a big reason we don't decide and choose recipes is because the process is actually trickier than you think. And we'll see why in the next idea segment. But for now, can you take my word that it is definitely, there's a lot more going on than you think. So that's why this is a process that definitely takes creative thought. And so it needs to be given a space of time when you're not under the gun, so your creative brain has a chance to be of help to you and engage. So put yourself back in the scene where you really wanted to have some new recipes. And now think about creating a space of time. And bear in mind, it doesn't have to be hours. It can be just 15, 20 minutes. That's plenty, or maybe even just 10. Now, when should it be? And obviously, right before dinner, we've decided that is not a good time to do this. So we want to set aside a time that's in advance of the meal making, maybe even a time when you could have a little fun and enjoy this and relax with it. And maybe even that time could be right now as we go through this exercise in this class or right after this class. Or if not, is there another time in the next few days when you could schedule it? I wonder if you can actually even commit to a time within the next 3 to 4 days. Is that realistic to think that you can do that? Well, now, as soon as I say create a space of time, that has that word time in it, and I know that could cause you to start panicking. And after all, how come anybody, if they hear that word time, that's an alarm bell, isn't it? Saying something takes time is almost like a death sentence for it. But I'm going to ask you if you can keep the panic response at bay while we go through the next few ideas. And then at the end of this webinar, we'll talk a little bit about finding time in our busy lives for this really critical thing of making healthy meals and finding the recipes for it. So now we're going to go on to step number 3, which is to know what you're looking for. No secret that it's hard to find something if you don't know what you're looking for. You might walk right past it. That's why it's important to know and articulate your criteria. And this is the heart of the decision-making process. And let me start this with kind of a funny way, but it's a way that might ring a bell for you and sound more familiar, and that's with clothing. And now, whether you're a male or female, you know that certain clothes look a lot better on you than others. And color is a key factor in whether something will look good or not. So that is often why you hear about learning your colors, so you'll be more capable of buying clothes that look good on you and that you don't waste your money on clothes that don't look good on you. Well, I learned this the hard way when a friend wanted to do a trade, my kitchen coaching for her clothing transformation services. Well, and I was leery, and for good reason, because I had a wardrobe that was full of black and white clothes, because it's really easy to shop and dress with only 2 options. But guess what? 2 colors were not my colors, and of course it was black and white. Well, when I learned this, I was really dismayed and depressed, because my easy dressing and shopping system was destroyed immediately. Now what am I going to do? Well, it turned out that my transformationalist helped me figure out what colors do look good on me with only about 5 or 6. And so I was in for a shopping surprise. When I went shopping with her, I realized that it wasn't so bad after all. In fact, it was pretty easy. I could actually just breeze by about 80% of the stuff on the racks and beeline in on a few things in my colors. I didn't get overwhelmed like I usually do when I go clothes shopping. And best of all, when I found something that was the right color, it looked good on me. The money I spent on it was not wasted. Well, can you see how this might work in the realm of recipes? Just as with clothes, we have an overwhelming number of recipes that we're faced with. Just like with clothes, when we can't find new recipes that really suit us, we default to whatever we have, which is when we get bored, we don't meet our health goals, and so on. So what if we could identify our recipe colors? In other words, those things or criteria that would make us really happy with our recipes, and conversely, those aspects that would automatically eliminate a recipe from consideration. Don't you think that would save us a lot of time, prevent us from getting overwhelmed, and better deliver the results we crave? Can you just imagine breezing through, like you're looking at that picture of that recipe heap on the screen right now? Can you imagine just breezing through 80% of that really quick because you have some criteria that automatically eliminate the stuff that are nowhere in the ballpark for you? So that's what we're going to do right now. Is experiment and see if we can come up with this kind of system for you. And when we start and we ask this question of what are you looking for in a recipe, I'm thinking you know it instinctively, but you may just never stop to identify and articulate those factors. In fact, it may seem a little bit odd to you to try to, in advance, identify what an ideal recipe looks like for you. Could be saying to yourself that, well, you just know when you see them. And certainly there is a part of recipe choosing that's in the realm of, I'll know it when I see it. But at the same time, remember that we got to deal with this overwhelm issue. And there's lots and lots of recipes that are completely off the mark and have no chance of making the cut. In fact, if I had to tell you, I think it's like 80 to 90% of the recipes I see don't even stand a chance. But it's because I know my criteria that I can breeze right by those without being overwhelmed. And then I can hone in on the few that I left to find the ones that really sing to me. So I want to show you and give you an example of how this works for me, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity. You got the handout that'll let you make your own recipe criteria, but I'm going to show you mine, and so you can see how it works, and then we'll do this with you as well. Now, I want to start by saying that, you know, I've been thinking about this problem with recipes for a long, long time, because it was a long time ago that I realized it was a big stumbling block for people on the healthy eating journey. People couldn't even find and access healthy recipes, so how were they going to travel along the healthy eating journey? So I've given it a lot of thought over the years, and I tried to figure out, well, what was I doing to be able to find recipes? And that's why I want to share this system with you so you can see if this can work for you. And so while I was preparing for this talk, I thought back about, you know, what do I do when I usually look for recipes? And it starts with my newspapers. People are always asking me, well, Mary, where do you get your recipes from? What cookbook do you love? And the fact is, I get most of my recipes, to the extent that I use recipes, I get most of them from the newspaper. And so when I'm thinking about this scenario of, just like I asked you to set the scene up, I'm thinking of me sitting at my kitchen counter, flipping through the food section. And we really think about giving myself a space of time. I always give myself a space of time, 5, 10, 15 minutes to go through the food section. I love it. That's kind of a relaxing time for me. And the comforting boundaries are almost automatic because there's not that many recipes to look through. So it's easy to reel it down to one or no recipes, but I'm not caught up in looking at recipe after recipe after recipe. So then it gets to be a question of what am I looking for? And of course, this is going to be personal for each person. But I want to show you the things that I'm looking for so that you can get an idea how this recipe criteria business works. I'm just sharing these with you so you can see how they first eliminate that 80 to 90% of recipes that will never make the grade, leaving you with just a manageable number of possibilities. And then for the 10 to 20%, we'll talk a little bit later about how you identify which of those are going to be the ones that you actually choose. But let me go through this chart real quickly. And you can see on the left here is things that I don't want in the recipe, and those will automatically eliminate it. And things that I do want, and if I don't see those, I'll probably breeze by a recipe as well. So you can see that some of the things are, if a recipe calls for processed foods, I pretty much ditch it right then. On the other hand, and you can see how these kind of, they are halves of the same whole. Because at the same time that I don't want the processed foods, I want clean, real, whole foods. And also, I told you, I'm looking for things that are a little lower in carbs. I've got to deal with certain food allergies. But on the other side, I love to finding new ideas that help me eat free of all my allergens. Like I found a recipe recently for a cauliflower crust pizza that's been just wonderful. I won't go with a recipe that's vegetable deficient unless I'm just looking for a meat recipe. And I'm always looking for fun ways to bring in more vegetables and new
and new vegetables so I can increase my variety. So I hope as I'm going through this, start thinking to yourself, what are going to be your criteria? And of course, we don't want anything that's boring and ho-hum. I love looking for new spices, new ingredients, new combinations of familiar ingredients, new ethnicities. And I really like it if things, and actually not just I really like it. This is an absolute for me. I don't even bother looking for gourmet recipes that are overdone and frilly. I just don't have time for that. Everything I look for is every day, but with a little pizzazz. You know, quick and easy, 30 to 40 minute things. And for me, I'm always mostly looking for dishes to cook for dinner. Breakfast and lunch is not a problem for me. And in that category, you know, meats, main dish, salad, soups. I like seasonal things because I get a farm share. I like to find recipes I can use my CSA box with, and I like things that are weather compatible, like not soups in the middle of summer, for instance. So now it's going to be your turn to identify what your criteria are, and I hope this has helped you. Looking at mine has helped you see and start sparking some thought in you about, yeah, those are the kind of things I do or don't like in my recipes. And now you should have this recipe finder chart in your handout. I hope you all had a chance to print those out. If you didn't, don't worry. Just take and grab a piece of paper and a pen, and you can start writing down your criteria. And I'll go through it really quickly with you. And you'll see that I've already filled in a couple of the categories for you over there. And what you don't want is fancy, frilly stuff that's good for entertaining. And of course, you can go ahead and find those kinds of things, but not today. And then under vegetables, yes, you do want lots of vegetables. That's just a given. You don't get an option. So let's just run through these categories really quickly. And I hope that you can start making your recipe finder chart out. And then after we're done with this, I'm going to ask for some feedback and see how this worked for you, see what kind of things that you came up with. And you know, the first category to think about, whether you do want it or you don't want it, is whether you're looking for everyday and not gourmet recipes. And like I say, I already filled that in for you. If you have any food allergy problems, that's kind of something that's got to be taken care of right at the beginning. So write those in, because if a recipe has some of those, you're just going to have to eliminate it unless you can come up with a good substitute. And then think about your health parameters. For me, of course, it's real whole foods, whole grains, lower carb. You know, but you might be a paleo person looking for lower fat, those kinds of things. So think about those, because those are going to definitely influence the kind of recipes that you're looking for. And like I say, vegetables, I've already made that choice for you. Yes, you're looking for lots of vegetables and lots of variety. On your meal type, what kind of meals do you need help with? I've been getting a lot of feedback from people needing help with breakfast and lunch. And so maybe those are the ones you want to focus on, just a couple of those new ones to add into your rotations. And then dish types. Like I had a woman call or email the other day. She said, "Oh, Mary, I wish you could help me find more salad recipes." So those ought to be what she focuses on, a couple of those. Now we get to taste. And you know, it should go without saying that you want dishes that sound like they will taste good. And you want to mix recipes that includes foods and flavors that you just don't like at all. But an interesting story on this is I received an email recently from a reader struggling around recipes, and she told me that she found a neat recipe using cauliflower rice, which would be great in terms of meeting her healthy eating goals. But she then mentioned that her family hates cauliflower. So I quickly advised her to steer clear of that one. Because it is true, of course, that you want to stay open to new foods, ingredients, and new flavors, but honestly, don't butt your head up against the wall right out of the starting gate. You know, start with things that at least have a pretty darn good chance of succeeding in making you happy with them. So the next thing on our list is new and different enough. And that kind of gets back to just what I was just talking about. It's kind of fun to try something new and different, but maybe not too much that it takes you too far out into left field. And then using up stuff in your fridge and pantry. I always think it's really nice to not have to waste food and grocery dollars. And one of the most common complaints I get from people is that, oh, I buy this ingredient for a recipe and then I can't use the rest. Or one woman told me that she always cooks a chicken every week and then shreds the leftovers, hoping to make something new and different with them. But she actually ends up making chicken tacos week after week after week. So for her, she might very well want to look for recipes that have a use for prepped chicken. So then we go down and think about your seasonal and weather compatibility, whether you're looking for things that are, and I hope this kind of goes with everyday not gourmet, is that you're looking for stuff that's not too complicated, that you understand the instructions. And this is where you might eliminate recipes that have more than 6 or 7 or 8 ingredients. That's one thing I do. And look for ones that also fit your schedule. If you never have time after work, except for about 30, maybe 25, 30, 40 minutes, then don't bother with recipes that take any longer. Stick with ones that will fit and work with the kind of schedule that you have. And then, of course, your food budget is an issue for a lot of us, and other criteria that you might come up with after seeing this list. Now, if you look at the top of this recipe finder chart, you'll see this would and could you bake it tonight? And as we go through all of the criteria that are in this recipe finder list, you know, they're actually all getting to one common thread, which is they're all trying to help you find recipes that you really would and could make tonight. That should be pretty obvious, but it's really easy once you start flipping through recipes to get sidetracked by what I call someday recipes. Someday recipes are the kind you pluck out of a magazine at the dentist's office. You're thinking, oh, wouldn't that be good when my kids come to visit? Or, oh, this would be perfect for us Saturday night in the winter when we want to sit around the fire, eat our hearty stew, and have some crusty bread and red wine with it. I'm not saying don't save those recipes, but just that's not what we're doing today. What we're looking for today are those would and could recipes. Those are the ones that you would and could make tonight. And that tonight is a really important part. If you are getting serious about a recipe, put it to the acid test. And would you make it tonight? As in, could you go in to the kitchen right after this class and make it? And if that's the case, then that's a good keyword. So now I'm going to switch us over into the Q&A mode, because I would love to hear and have a little feedback about how this experience is going for you. So were you able to complete the recipe finder? Did it help you clarify what you need and want in a recipe? Did you discover anything new or helpful about what you need or want in the way of a recipe? And can you envision using this chart, this recipe finder chart, even if only intuitively, to flip through recipes and quickly separate the wheat from the chaff? If there's any feedback on how it worked to fill out that recipe finder chart, and can you see yourself using it? Is it going to be helpful for you? So go ahead and click that Ask a Question button if you've got any ideas or any thinking on that. And we can also talk about it at the end when I open these up. Let's see, Maureen has a question, so I'm going to give her the voice. Maureen, you're on.
Okay, so I found the exercise very interesting. I want to put it to use. It makes a lot of sense. My one of the biggest things for me as a single person is that I really do not like leftovers. And if I have more than one meal of leftover, it ends up in the garbage. And so one of the big turnoffs for me is just converting recipes from serves 6 to 12 to serves 2. And so right there, I start to lose interest in working with recipes.
That's interesting. And so is it at that point that you might just, put it aside and move on and do what I call punt and then just default eat?
Yeah, I might just put it aside and just, have, what kind of lettuce I have in the refrigerator and some tomatoes.
Maureen, that is a really good question, and that's exactly the kind of thing that can stop us from this exercise, so we don't get access to those new recipes. Now, the idea, the whole cooking for one sort of thing, and the idea of leftovers, That is just something that it takes a little more of an answer than I can give right now. But you know what? Could we possibly? I just wrote it down for the Q&A at the end of class. Could we possibly address it there? Because I'd like to. I actually have some thoughts on that, and I would like to actually talk to you and talk to others who might face the same thing and ask you some questions and get some feedback about what my thoughts are or not. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And then if I forget at the end, make sure you remind me, okay? Okay. And you can see from the question that Maureen asked, you see that's another whole issue that I didn't even have on the recipe criteria finder. So can you begin to see though, as you're working through the criteria in the recipe finder, did you notice that there's a lot that goes on when you're deciding what to make for a meal? Did you have any idea that in deciding this supposedly simple thing of just what you eat for dinner, you're juggling a dozen or more different factors? And very often, they don't cooperate with each other. For instance, making something that tastes good to you might not align with your healthy eating dreams. And sticking to your food budget might mean compromising on the special fancy cheese that you'd love to put in a dish. So now you can probably see why you were having trouble deciding what to cook and why we squirm away from making those decisions, even though they should be pretty easy. Remember about that when I talked about how it shouldn't be that hard to pick out a recipe, but we don't do it. And the reason we're not doing it, you can see now why this phenomenon happens, because it's trickier than you think. And then, to make matters worse, we try to do it in 2 minutes. We treat it in a small way, like, we're just choosing a pair of socks to wear or brushing our teeth. So is it any wonder that we get caught up in a cycle of despair about ever finding some new recipes to make? So I hope with this exercise that you'll begin to get more generous with yourself and give it its due, because it is more complex than you think. So that wraps up step number 3, and then we're going to go quickly through the other steps. So now the next step that we have is narrowing the universe. It's ironic that people always seem to want more recipes when in fact more recipes actually make the decision-making process worse because we have more stuff to look through. So here's a suggestion. As you're flipping through with your recipe finding criteria and you find recipes that don't pass the could and would you make it tonight test, why don't you just get rid of them now? Or if it's too hard to pitch completely, and I know sometimes it's really hard to pitch recipes, just box them up and put them somewhere outside the kitchen, just so that it's not in your line of vision, begging you for attention and helping you to lose your focus. And this is what we call narrowing the universe. And never worry that you're throwing away something and you'll never find a good recipe like that again, because there's more where that came from. There's always more recipes where that came from. I can pretty well assure you that you'll never regret tossing a recipe. That brings us to step 5, is you can really increase your efficiency if you find recipe sources with a high success ratio. So remember, just a few minutes ago, I was trying to find a recipe in the Great Good Food recipe book, which is a gourmet recipe book. That was a stupid start. I should have been looking in a nice 30-minute recipe book to find the kind of recipes that I really want. So start taking notice of where you find recipes that work for you. Is it a quick and easy, that 30-minute cookbook, or a paleo website, or a certain blogger, or a health-conscious magazine? And then once you find that good source, use that source again and again to shortcut, or sources like it, to shortcut your recipe decision process. And would you also, while you're doing that, notice which ones have recipes that have good preparation success as well. A lot of recipes aren't tested that well, especially on a lot of the blogs where people are churning out recipes day after day. So that can really impact your success in the kitchen. So if you're finding that a certain blog or a certain a magazine or something has recipes that don't really work that well for you, move on to something else. So now let's go on to step number 6, which is making that final cut. So now we've used our recipe finding criteria to eliminate 80% of recipes in a cookbook or your stack, the ones that just have no chance of working for you. But now you're down to that last 10 or 20%. How will you know which ones will be a winner of those 10 to 20%? And there's no question that this is a real bottleneck in deciding on recipes. You found one that should be good. I mean, it matches your colors, say. But how do you make the list from seeing it, a list of ingredients on a piece of paper, and figuring out if you'll like them when they're translated into a specific dish? This is a tough thing to do, I'll grant you. So a couple of the suggestions that I tell people is to envision those recipe ingredients on a restaurant menu, because sometimes we can, by doing that, we can go, well, would I like that if it was on a restaurant menu? And that can help. And along with that, look at the ingredients, and are they ones you like? There's always a balance here where you want to maybe branch out a little bit, but you want to make sure that most of the ingredients are one you're familiar with and that the combination of them doesn't look too far out. Another thing that really helps pictures, one of our readers alerted me to do this when I sent out an email asking people what helps them find recipes. And one of our readers said, she just won't even use a recipe unless it has a picture to kind of guide her to where she's going. And if that's the case for you, then when you're finding good recipe sources, look for ones that have pictures. And then practice. I hate to say it, but indeed, as you do more and more of this, you're going to get better and better at finding what combinations you like. And you're going to get better and better as you make those recipes and you pay attention to the tastes and flavors in them. You're going to get better and better at knowing, oh, these are ingredients I like, these are combinations I like. And so your recipe repertoire is going to be able to expand at that point because you're getting better at knowing what you like. So by now, if you've gone through this process, you should be ready for this last step, which is to organize. And there's no need to get all fancy or get all rigged out by organizing. Some people really feel like they're not organizing types. But there's a couple of reasons why you want to stay a little bit organized with your choices. One, you just don't want to forget about them, which is entirely possible. And two, you want to make sure that you can even find the recipe again when it's time to actually make it. You certainly don't want to spend another 10 minutes researching for it. So what I suggest are a couple of organizational steps, just simple things. One, you could write down your ideas. And in your handout, you're going to find this cute little meal idea list there. And you can use that, or you can just use a piece of paper. But write down the titles of the couple recipes you have. And then I am a big believer in printing, cutting out, copying, having a physical copy of the recipe. And then you can attach that to the piece of paper where you write down the titles. And if you've got cookbooks or magazines, obviously you don't want to rip those out. So you put stickies, like you might have seen that. That's what I did with the Great Good Food Cookbook. I put stickies on the pages that I wanted to remember. Some of you may be using a digital filing system. So you might want to create a bookmark folder in your web browser or organize a folder in your computer of things that you have yet to look at, and then once you find the recipes you like, those few that are really going to be ones that you use, put those in a separate folder or a separate bookmark. And then big thing is to create a home for these in your kitchen. Because when you raise them in the kitchen, you don't want them to have them buried under the newspapers or under the groceries or whatever. You want to have a little sacred spot for them so that you can find them really easily. Top of the microwave, maybe a space on the counter that's an unused space in a cupboard on a shelf. And then the last thing is just to keep them decluttered. After a while, if you get 10 or 12 there and they're just starting to heap up again, declutter or file them away. And once you use them, be sure to file them away, maybe in your recipe box or your recipe notebook, so they don't just sit there and continue to be more cluttered that you have to go through every time. So that's the framework and the 7 steps for creating a good decision-making process so that you will actually start making decisions and you'll be able to translate the recipes in your cookbooks into real meals on the table. And I know that We went through it step by step, and I had to explain a lot so it can seem clunky. But look at it just over and get a quick overview of it now, and you can see that it can really go pretty quickly. Like you understand about comforting boundaries and creating a space of time. And so once you've done this a couple times, you'll have those down. You have your recipe finder chart so that you know what you're looking for. You're going to keep your recipe stack decluttered so that you don't have so much to look through. You're going to continue to find recipe sources with a high success ratio, which makes things even easier. And you're going to use that restaurant menu idea and check out the ingredients. And then just with practice, you're going to get better and better at making the final cut, finding those few 1 or 2 recipes that really sing to you and are really exciting and fun for you. And then just a couple quick organizational things to make sure you can find those recipes when it's time to actually make them. And so to conclude, I need to address the elephant in the room. And I referenced this elephant earlier. It's the issue of time. You know, it's always interesting after my classes to ask if there's anything I've suggested in that class that's that difficult to do. I mean, is there something you could not do that you don't have the ability to do? And this is where I wanted to have this poll put up, and people have answered it, some have answered it, but go ahead. And thank you again, you guys are replying just perfectly. You're answering, no, there's nothing. Because the fact is that creating a recipe translator mechanism is, you know, pretty mechanical. It's kind of one of those one foot in front of the other kinds of things. And yet, even though it is a pretty simple, you can totally do this, is there a part of your brain that's trying to convince you that a decision-making process is actually impossible? If so, I'll bet it's that part of the brain that is the time monitor. In fact, it's probably been nagging at you since we started, saying, well, this process takes time. And in our crazy busy world, saying that something takes time is the equivalent of saying that it's impossible. And this very point came up just recently when I was talking with another reader, and she's trying to become a vegetarian. And she just watched a PBS show where a woman had shown how to take a non-vegetarian recipe and convert it to be vegetarian. And after telling me about the show, she said, you know, as I think about it, it's not really that hard if I just take the time to do it. And I wonder if that's what is going through your brain. This isn't that hard, but am I willing to take the time to do it? That's an enormous mountain to climb in our world. So it's important before we conclude this webinar that we take a look at this elephant in the room. Because honestly, this elephant is the most important part of everything I've said in this webinar. The 7 steps I shared are definitely good and helpful, and they'll give you a good start and provide you a structure. But more important to your recipe success than any of that is whether you can get comfortable taking the time to do this process from now and then so you can continue to have a source of new, fun, helpful recipes in your life. Once you give yourself that time, you'll figure out a good system. You'll use the steps I've given you and figure out a good system that works for you. So this is why I actually do a whole series around the time issue, because it's such an enormous barrier. And not just for deciding on recipes, but for the entire health eating journey. And we can't go into all that right now, I know. But I want to at least give you a couple of things to start thinking about to help resolve the elephant. And the first is just acknowledge it, name it. You probably felt something unsettling as we went through the decision process. So, you know, don't hide from it or feel embarrassed that once again time is keeping you from your dreams. That's just the way it is, and we're going to work on it. Next thing is to firm up your intentions. You know, what you ask yourself, is healthy food really what you want? Because what you really want, your true intention, is the foundation that supports all your healthy meal making and eating efforts. It's the key that makes it all work. And then remember that having new, healthier recipes is what will guide you to the next key to your success. So as your brain balks about spending 10 to 15 minutes making recipe decisions, You might take a station break from it and just reaffirm that, is this important to me? And do I really want it? And then intentions lead right into priorities. I know you've all heard that achieving your goals isn't so much a matter of time, but priority. And I sometimes bristle with that saying, like, really, you have no idea how my life really has no time to prioritize X, Y, or Z. Yet, can I tell you, there's a magic that can happen here. It's absolutely true that from the perspective of your internal time clock, that's bound into a 24-hour, 1,440-minute cycle each day. No, you don't have any time in the day for anything else. But as our true, deepest intentions shift, it can be surprising how the resources we need, like time, can suddenly appear in ways we would have never figured out. So even though it seems like you're boxed into a corner, can you just keep yourself open to that magic? And like I said, we talk about this more in my time seminars, and we don't have time to get into it, but I at least want to make you aware of it. So just the final couple things I want to go through is, I hope you're beginning to see here that cooking is a thinking activity. Far from being a stupid and brainless activity, feeding ourselves well is something that takes thought, engagement, and interest. Of course, if all you want to do is fill the hunger hole in your stomach, that can be a stupid and brainless effort. You just stop by a drive-through and pick up something. But if you want to enjoy the sweetness and delight of good health, then it's important to reorient our thinking and understand that feeding ourselves is a thinking activity that really takes our engagement and our involvement. And in fact, this is the thing that probably distinguishes my programming from most of the programming that's out there. Several years ago, I realized that the biggest barrier we face to creating healthy lifestyles are the thought barriers in our heads. And time is a perfect example. If you believe there isn't time to make healthy meals, then it doesn't matter how many great tips, skills, and strategies I give you. You'll always be running at a deficit, just barely getting by. And sadly, in our culture, in our fast food, instant culture, there's a lot going against us and not much going for us when we want to shift our intentions and our time to the slow, patient, but enduring activity of nurturing our bodies and our health. And that's another reason why I do what I do, is to be one of the many people who are supporting that shift to slow, patient focus on our health. And also to creating a community so that we can all support each other in this endeavor. You know, when I first started on my health eating journey 25 years ago, it was a really lonely walk. But it's becoming more and more common these days, and I hope I can be a part of making us all part of a common community, supporting each other to achieve our healthy eating goals. So, last thing I want to touch on is just where do you go from here? You've made tremendous progress today. Being able to decide on a couple reps with friends to guide you is indeed the foundation for acting on your healthy eating dreams. But then we have to build on that foundation to get a full meal on the table. Some of you may be able to just take off and translate your recipes into meals on the table, no problem. But others of you might have questions like, what will you have with that recipe? What would be a good night to make the dish that would work with your schedule? What fresh ingredients do you need at the store? Are you missing any of your usual pantry staples? And now this is going to go on, and it's going to go on because these are all questions and barriers that are going to come up. What about grocery shopping? What about the knives, the boards, the pans, the bowls, the spatulas, the graters, and all the other equipment you need to make the dish? Do you feel comfortable with the cooking instructions? Do you understand the terms? Do you feel confident about spicing and seasoning the dish to make it taste like you like? Do you even have spices, seasonings, and condiments? Does anything need to be done in advance, like taking something from the freezer? Are your kitchen counters accessible? Can you get into the sink to wash the vegetables? And speaking of vegetables, do you know how to buy, peel, cut, and otherwise prep and cook the vegetables called for? Do you feel pretty certain that you've picked out a recipe that will serve your health? And then finally, is your head behind your actions? Or are you meeting resistance from unsupported thoughts? If these kind of questions are coming up for you, it's not unusual, but unfortunately, all too often, the answers and solutions that go with them don't come up. So in that case, can I suggest that you look at our flagship program, which is called Cook Happy, Live Healthy. This is a 3-class program that will help you begin to find solutions to all these other pieces of the meal-making equation, beyond the first crucial step of just finding a good recipe. You'll learn skills just like the recipe decision-making process in this webinar that will turn healthy meal-making into something that's natural and normal, no big deal. You don't have to be stuck mired in all the obstacles that pop up when you want to begin making healthier meals. We can learn things and solutions that get you around those. And importantly, you'll begin to address those thought barriers like time that other programs don't address, but that are crucial to the success of your healthy meal-making journey. So can I urge you to check out that website right at the bottom of that screen, cookhappylivhealthy.org, and that's where you can learn about the 60-40 secret that most people don't know about, and which is why they struggle so much with everyday meal making. And you'll learn about the meal making skills that most people are missing, and how you can easily get those skills through the Cook Happy program. Don't worry if you forget that website or can't write it down. There's a little description in the handouts that you can find that you got with the recipe finder chart in that. So with that, I want to just thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate having the opportunity to share skills and habits and ideas around healthy meal making. Anything that can bring your healthy eating dreams closer to reality for you. So thank you, and now we're going to go into a question and answer session, and I would be happy to answer any question you have, even if it's not around this webinar. I'm going to start with Maureen, and she said she really doesn't like leftovers, but I believe you said you don't like them. Maybe once you'd be okay with having the leftovers. Is that right, Maureen? Thanks. Maureen, my thought on that is this is just an interesting question because I can't tell you how many times it comes up. Here's my question back to you. You mentioned recipes with 6 to 12. Most recipes that I come across are more like, 4, serving of 4, which means that it would be a pretty easy leap to make it just for 2. And if it was for 2, then it could be enough for a meal today. And then, you can wait. What I always try to encourage people to know is that food can often last a little longer than, we get wigged out a lot by food contamination. But if your refrigerator is working well, food can easily last 2 or 3 days. And so I encourage people, okay, if leftovers aren't your favorite, could it be something that you wait 2 or 3 days for? And then maybe it's not quite so leftover-ish for you. So I want to throw that back at you and in your recipe criteria, finder then, maybe what you would be looking for are recipes that only serve 4. I mean, if it's a 6 to 12, that's part of that 80 to 90% you just breeze right over. And I mean, I know that there's lots and lots of recipes out there that just serve 4. So if you can have only those show up in your 10 to 20% and choose from those, and then it's usually pretty simple to have a recipe, and it doesn't affect the quality or the instructions too much. And then you'd have just enough for 2 meals, and then you could spread those out. Does that sound like something that could work for you?
Yeah, it does. I just, the thing with leftovers is that I don't like to eat them in consecutive days, which you already talked about. Right. But then when it gets too long in there, then I feel like it's not really fresh. If I wait a few days. So, and I'm so tired of throwing food out.
Yeah, no, with good reason. Another thing to think about, Maureen, is that you would prep 2 servings, but you'd only cook 1. Okay. And I do this a fair amount. For instance, here's an example. Is that I made Thai lettuce wraps last night, and I had enough left over for today. So what I did is I actually I just put the pan of the filling in the fridge, and I'm going to heat it up again, after this webinar, and then I'll get out. I have the lettuce stored and the carrots that go with it and the dressing that's stored. And so it will be just like new, you might say, because I've cooked it more fresh. And even if I didn't just warm up the leftovers, I could have cooked it. I could have had the pork and the green onions just cook the second half fresh. I did that a fair amount where I prep stuff and then cook it later.
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah.
Okay. And then another thing to think about is, I'll think about this more. I may just email you a couple of things, and if other people are interested, I can send it out to the group as well. We come up with, and maybe I would love the group to maybe brainstorm. But Maureen, I'm thinking that I'd like to think about this some more now. After those initial comments, think about this some more. Maybe have you think about it some more. Maybe we can come up with just a few more ideas and then pass those out to the group, because I think this is a problem, like I said, that comes up a lot. Does that sound okay? And did you have any other thoughts before we?
No, that sounds good.
Okay. Alrighty, good. Well, like I say, the discussion room is open. We'd love to hear anything else you want to talk about, or any feedback you have on the webinar. I'm especially interested in how well it works for people. I do hear Debbie has made a comment. This was helpful. I like the prep ahead idea. My problem is I like buy too many veggies at the farmer's market. Debbie, that is a common problem because they are so beautiful and so gorgeous. And the next step after you start learning to identify your recipes and really choose them is to plan your menus. And that's when we can help. Planning ahead is when we can start having a mechanism in place that prevents us from overbuying and having to waste. Oh, and then she says, I'm not confident how to substitute. And I'm not sure what she means, what substitute what. Or she's typing something more. And Sue Horn is typing something. So I'll just stay on here until everybody gets their comments in. So Debbie says, I'm not confident how to substitute and replace one ingredient for another and still make the recipe good to eat. Yeah, so Debbie, I think that meal planning is going to be the key on that. Because then when we go to the store, we go to the farmer's market, we make sure that we've got the right ingredients and the right vegetables. And to make sure we don't have to do that substitution, because that substitution is a pain in the neck. Now, granted that when you're shopping at the farmer's market, sometimes you don't know what's there. So you go, you find some things, and then you come home. So then what I learned to do when I used to have the same problem is I menu planned in reverse. One, I had to try to exercise some restraint, but two, once I came home, I organized my vegetables. Before I put them away, I organized them by which ones will last the longest, and then I planned menus so that to make sure that I would use them up. As far as the non-farmer's market ingredients go, though, menu planning is the key. Once you have that menu plan, if you have to go to the store and buy other things, you'll make sure to get the right things and not have to substitute if you plan ahead and make a good shopping list. So could you write back and let me know if that helps a little bit? And I'd love to be able to go into it more, but that is another webinar. And by the way, that's the kind of stuff we learn in the Cook Happy Healthy program, is building those habits and all those strategies up. Sue says, helpful real life. I realize I haven't been spending enough time planning meals. Meals just don't appear by themselves. I will start doing more of that. Thanks. Yes, Sue, and again, this is exactly what we do in that Cook Happy Healthy program, is we try to, I try to give you helpful structure again to build that habit and really firmly entrench it into your life, and so that it's not something you forget about. And another thing for both of you that I debated is whether it would be good. I threatened to organize these as meal planning sessions, and it's not like this. Again, it's not like it's anything that's hard, but it's just having somebody who once a week will meet at a certain time, and it will give you that structure to make sure you do that. Because it's not hard. It's just making yourself do it is a lot of it. And I've often thought that having like just kind of a fun online group, just like we're doing now, would be kind of a fun thing to have, and it would kind of force us all to plan our menu and reap the many, many benefits of having planned menus. So please do give me any feedback on that if you have any. And Debbie says kale versus spinach. Oh, explain the substitutions. Oh, okay. Kale versus spinach. Well, both of them can be used raw, but kale needs to be massaged in some kind of acid. That's why it's usually done in an olive oil and lemon marinade. And it has to sit there a little bit to take the harshness and bitterness out of it. Spinach, of course, can just be, just dressed in a salad and eaten immediately. In terms of cooking, spinach cooks very quickly. In fact, you don't want to cook it too much. Kale, it takes some definite cooking, a lot longer than spinach, and you also want to de-stem it. Take the stems out because they take a really long time to cook. By the time they cook, the leaves would be mush. So we always in our classes learn to de-stem the kale, then chop up the leaves, and you will have to cook them, like I say, a lot longer than spinach. So the thing is that both of those flavor-wise can, once the kale is cooked or marinated, they can kind of be substituted for each other. They're close enough in taste. But the thing is that what's nice, like for instance, we use kale a lot in soups because it can handle the longer cooking time of a soup. Whereas we might use a spinach if we just want to have, say, an egg scramble where we want to have a vegetable that cooks really fast. The kale you'd have to cook first and then add it to the scramble. If we're making a pasta dish, the spinach would just kind of work in and then in an instant it'd be cooked and it'd be done. Again, the kale would have to be cooked first and then added to the pasta. So does that give you a sense of how they're different? It's not the taste so much, it's how you have to treat them to be able to add them interchangeably in a dish. Yeah, Debbie, it's definitely experience and further reading. And again, I'll just keep emphasizing it can be really good to take our class, the Cook Happy Live Healthy, because in the second class we go into, I'm pretty sure we do some work with spinach and we talk a lot about the very question you just brought up. So really consider that. It's on a special now. It's only $49 as an introductory special, so it's very affordable. Okay. Well, I want to thank you again, and you all have my emails if you have any other questions later. I always appreciate it. It helps me improve this seminar. And so at this point, I think I'm going to sign off. I want to thank you again, and happy cooking. Bye, everyone.